Okay, so before the break, we set up a little a document with some HTML tags. Went over the steps of making a plan beforehand, and those 2 points I was stressing, the budget and the timeline. I think it went a little bit over that, so just to help show that it doesn't take too long to make a plan, and that is a useful skill. Cross off, make a mark there that was wrong, and that was more like 45 minutes. So my initial estimate was only about half the time that was needed to make that page, which I wrote 0 up here. But that's another one you might want to practice. So if there was a making up a skill or making up a number and practicing that skill, it took about twice as long. So that should have been 3 times bigger or something, the price. And just do a quick little analysis like that afterwards and develop the skill of predicting those 2 numbers. So we set up that stuff, got the words on the page and a picture. I kept making a silly mistake apparently when trying to download the picture, kept saving the link. That's not a very useful thing. They should get rid of that button. We got that on there, but it's just kind of plain. It's all the default text with default text written in black, everything aligned to the left. Not much changes. So we're not going to get too far into styling it, but I did go ahead and grab the color markers so we could start doing something to at least get to the background colors and the color of the text. So maybe we can give the header a red background. And the footer, yeah. This will show up maybe on these article tags. You could give it a blue background. On both of them, so they're consistent. And maybe some green text in the paragraphs. So not a whole lot of changes on there, but hopefully something better than just black text on a white background. So it'll start looking a little bit better for us. Maybe I'll grab the brown marker. And then the overall, I had a limited color of markers. We'll maybe try a couple colors. But then an overall brown background based off the color of markers I have. But there's a lot more colors on the computer than common dry erase markers. So we can find a better color, something colored, make it look a little bit better. That's what we're going to be spending a lot of time on. Just kind of random syntax for the coloring today. Throughout this semester, we'll talk in detail about choosing things, and I'll at least throw out some keywords so they can go do research on the psychology behind different things. Color theory is a big one. Colors have a huge impact on people. Why prison cells are painted soft pink. It makes people less violent. That's why most fast food restaurants, or the majority of fast food restaurants, have yellow or red in their logos. It makes people want to buy food. And color has a whole lot of effect on people. White space is important. I know Zach has you have your degree in graphic design previous. So you probably spend a whole lot of time studying the importance of white space and color theory. Just getting into implementing that even the fonts we use, it's not as highly studied as color theory, but the curves and the fonts, that does have a big effect on people. So at some point this semester, I'll at least throw out some keywords to get y'all started researching stuff, and we'll talk about it some. Hit up some of the highlights. We're kind of restricted for time, and we need to dedicate a lot of that time just to practicing the developing code. So we can't get too deep into that stuff in this class. Let's see. So way back in the original creation of HTML, we would do colors with attributes. Original HTML. I'll just put circa early 90s, early 1990s. We had to use tag attributes to style things. Style with tag attributes. So we would have something like maybe the body tag. We'd throw in the background BG color attribute. It's been a few years since I typed it. I think we might have actually typed background for that. Typed out the whole word. But if I write BG color for the notes, you all will know what I'm referring to. And this is not something we do, so it's not something we're going to type. It's just an exact reference to the old way. And say maybe, I don't know, orange. We wanted an orange background. And you can see, probably very quickly see a problem with that. That's only going to affect the body tag. We want a different one of our tags have some color other than orange. We're going to have to put that in there. So essentially we end up having to put attributes in every single tag, and probably not just one of them. We'd have the background color, the foreground color, the font that's involved in it, and there's quite a few attributes that went in there. Over and over and over again on every single page. We don't do that much anymore. I'm going to write that symbol on there while I have a red marker with me. We don't do that much anymore. It was a headache. We do some attributes. For the most part, the only attributes we still use very often by the validating standards are informational and action things. We have event listeners for event-driven programming built into every HTML tag. So not really going to show up in this class, except for one lesson near the end when we look at JavaScript, as well as probably PHP. Unless a good reason to change to something different than PHP happens between now and then, we'll do that. But PHP is a pretty easy language to work with, really straightforward, and we'll just see sort of a class example on it. But we need ways to call those. So we need event listeners, things that listen for events. So things that like on load. So that as soon as that tag gets loaded on the page, an event from either the JavaScript or the PHP on the server gets ran when that gets loaded. Or on click. So then if that element gets clicked on, a little a function in the script, one of the scripts runs. We will just see that very briefly at the end here. Each of those are kind of their own course specifically. SDEV 250 is JavaScript, and SDEV 253 is PHP and MySQL. So I guess client side and server side scripting respectively for those. That's further down the road. For us, we're mostly looking at ways to style it, make it look better. Maybe some informational attributes. what we need from the information is we need a way to identify it. So the modern way is tag attributes give us a way to identify a particular element. And I shouldn't say a way to do it. It gives us ways to do it. We have lots of ways to identify an element with the attributes. So the main three, the first one that we're going to use a lot will be class. Those who have had other programming courses might remember the word class showing up quite often with object-oriented stuff. It's very, very related to that here, but we won't necessarily dive into the relationship in the background. There's a lot of stuff to cover. We don't need to go really far down rabbit holes and get into what's happening in assembly language before it turns into machine language and browser and all that stuff. We just need to go over the front end stuff for the most part. But the first way, the primary way we're going to do this, and you might have noticed before the break that predictive text and Adam kept trying to put the class attribute in the tags. So that should be an indication right there. That's the one we're going to use a lot. We'll also use name and ID. And we can mix and match them. So the idea for class, the main idea when we use that, I'm on the board. Okay, yeah. I have to check the camera occasionally and make sure that I'm still writing someplace where y'all can see it. A class is going to group similar things. What else do I have here? One tag can have multiple classes. And classes almost always relate to multiple tags. So many-to-many relationship, if y'all have heard that term before, and somewhere else in IT stuff things. The name is kind of semi-unique.
120
it's things that are connected would share a name. Like checkboxes. Usually if there's a bunch of, say choose which options you want, like choose up to 5 things from this list. Well, those checkboxes need connected when they get into the scripting things in the background. So we would give all of them the same name, or radio buttons and things that are very closely connected. All right, checkboxes here for an example of that. usually everything gets its own name. So if we had a big form with checkboxes and text boxes and buttons, but pretty much all of the input things on that form would get their own name, except maybe the checkboxes because they all go together or something. But checkboxes are just different options for the same input, really. So sort of a one-to-one, but it's kind of more of a many-to-one because it's not a tight restriction. So many to many, many to one, maybe a one-to-one. And ID is supposed to be unique. Each element should have its own ID attribute. Just like what ID means to us, right? The IDs we all carry around in our wallets. Those IDs are unique to us. Because we might all have a driver's license, but every one of our driver's license is a unique thing. That's why we're allowed to use it as an ID. And in general, I guess there is sort of a stipulation there. I'll say it after I write this in general part. In general, class is what we use most often with CSS. Name is what we use most often with the server side scripts. And ID is used most often with client side scripts. That is not a hard, fast rule. This semester we will access elements by all three of them with cascading style sheets. We use all three of them in CSS. Excuse me, but our general rule of thumb is classes are used most often with CSS. Names are used most often with server-side scripts, and IDs are used most often with client-side scripts. It's not and these things I wrote up here aren't necessarily restrictions. IDs should be unique, but I quite often use the fact that a computer does not know how to count to one to tell if something is unique or not in my scripts. Like if I want something to happen in several places simultaneously, I'll give them all the ID, all the same ID. And then when the computer runs that script that refers to that ID, well, computers aren't intelligent. They don't know how to count to one. Like, okay, this one seems bigger than the last time I counted to one, but I'll change it all at once. So it can give us a shortcut bit. That's probably bad form. The ID should be unique, like a one-to-one relationship thing. We're mostly identify stuff with classes, and we can use multiple classes. So there's different ways we can mix and match our style rules. So that's something we'll see probably next week. Take a look at differences because we can organize all the style rules we write in terms of the elements they go to. Or we could organize all the style rules based off the rule itself and organize all the blue stuff together and all the red stuff somewhere separate from it. There's different ways to do it. We will see several throughout the semester. A lot of information. And yeah, so then we use these identifiers, just informational attributes we put in the tags, to access them from Cascading Style Sheets. Cascading, I'll point at the picture here. The reason it took so long to get a standard is because there was a debate on how to pass information around a web page. So pretty much everybody agrees, and if you think about it before long, you'll realize that the way we've styled this paragraph can't be isolated to this paragraph. Everything else on the page kind of needs to know about it, because it needs to know what's below it as it sets up its rules, or the stuff afterwards definitely needs to know. So the other things on the web page need to know about the style rules for all the other stuff. And there's two ways that can be passed around. If we start at the innermost level, the innermost nesting, and work outward, that's called bubbling. If we start at the outermost level and work inward, that's called cascading. And the two ways that we can pass all the style rules around to make sure everything on the page knows about everything else. And that debate went on and on for a long time about which would be better. As the name implies, we're going to get into CSS, which stands for Cascading Style Sheets. So that's the style rule that starts at the outermost level and works inward. But as far as that debate between bubbling and cascading, it went on for so long that machines got fast enough that anymore we do both. The cascading style sheet flows through and applies everything, and then it bubbles back out as a confirmation. So we do, the debate went on for so long, the machines no longer have trouble doing both. But it was pretty much total agreement that everything on the page needs to know about everything else. Otherwise, it's really hard to add style rules to it. So now we're ready to get into CSS. There are three ways we can do this. And I'll use bubbling. I'll start at the innermost level, kind of a build up on the old one. We can put it in line, in the tag itself. I have something else right on the board. I'll do it in a few minutes. I'll jump over here and start doing this in the example we have open. We have some stuff here that we need to apply some style rules to. Like on this picture, so this header section needs a red background. So we can go in here and do that. And originally what I was writing right here, we had to put each style separately. And each as a separate attribute. There was a background color attribute, and a foreground color attribute, and a font attribute, and a font size attribute, and everything was, there's lots and lots of attributes to shove in there. With CSS, we can put them all into one attribute called style. So we'll set up a style attribute, and there are two parts to it. The property we want to change and the value we want to assign to that property. So in this case, background dash color. And that style, I like to start with this one because that summarizes the way CSS is written. It's very organized as far as the pattern that the language follows. And things are fully spelled out, all lowercase with dashes. So background dash color is going to give us just the background color. And yeah, all of our stuff in CSS, the properties are fully spelled out in all lowercase letters with dashes in between words. And then we just need some value to put to that. We are going to spend a good bit of time talking about colors very, very soon. So for now, I'm just going to use the generic named colors. You do have to be careful with named colors. So I'm just going to type red there. But there's much better ways to do colors. We'll see that soon. When we just use the names, they'll look different on different machines. Slight differences. So things that would colors that would still match, like I don't know, I'm not good at matching colors. Blue and green, I guess, match. They would look different on different monitors, and in some cases even different days on the same monitors, but they would look different machine to machine. But if the names match, they would still match. So they look different consistently, as opposed to when we use hex code for the colors, which is direct electrical control of the switching. We manually set what the switches are going to be, and those are consistent everywhere because it's not fancy code. We actually determine which of those are ones and which are zero in that coding. And then there's better ways to tell set up graphics, lots and lots of them. We will spend a full day on colors, and it will, just on how we get the names of colors, it will probably spill over into the next lecture. So there's lots of that. But to start with, I'm just going to use the names. So I'll just say, give it a red background with an inline style. So to start, at least everything's not one solid color. It's gonna take a long time to do that for every tag though, right? That's kind of getting back to that original, the original problem. If we had to put that into every single one of these opening tags, it'd get to be a headache. Or there's 2 articles and 4 paragraphs. So that's some redundancy in what we need type, because the way I colored in the picture up here, the article backgrounds are the same color, and the text in the paragraph are the same color. So if we put that in every single opening tag, that would be more than we needed to type. We need a way to pass it around. So I need to erase the section of the board. Is it okay if I erase this stuff over here? From here over. I'll keep the picture because I'll probably still point at that. We will see these repeatedly: class, name, ID, and that middle section is just an original note. You all okay if I erase this? Okay, nobody's responding, so I'm going to go ahead and erase it. It's been up here for a minute. Hopefully it's okay. It's in the video, so you'll be able to come back and find it if you needed it for some reason. Okay, I should maybe avoid that red marker. So, applying cascading style sheets, or CSS is what we usually say. So we saw that first one there, which is called inline. And that is just as a style attribute. In the opening tags. Yes, I kind of went through. So we can put it inline, a style attribute in the opening tags. In every opening tag. So make quite a few of those. So the second method takes that a step up, so we can send it to apply across the whole page at once. And it's called embedded. And this is a style tag in the head section. Style tag. Head section. With rules for the whole page. That's not how to spell whole. Whole page. There we go. That'll work a little bit better for us, especially in this case, because we only have one page. So what do CSS rules look like? I kind of ran out of room, so I'm going to write a number 3 up here in a minute when we get to it. Just to continue this list, and I'll put this next part down here. CSS Style Rules. These are very related to C++ language, something called structure in C++. So white space doesn't matter. What matters is where the curly braces. It doesn't matter where we put them, it just matters that we have them there. Some keywords that it recognizes, it already knows about, and semicolons between separate rules. The order we put them in doesn't really matter. So I'm going to kind of follow a certain pattern here throughout the semester. And the first thing we have is select the selector. So first thing we do is select which elements we are going to apply these style rules to. And that gets typed up, and following it is some curly braces, which we can put here and put the closing curly brace over here. That would be fine. Or we could come down to the next line, put the opening curly brace here, fill out all the rules between, and the closing curly brace way down here. We could do some random indenting. Come down the line, put our curly brace here, throw in a couple lines, and then put the closing curly brace right at the end of it. Whatever you want to do with that. As long as the opening curly brace is the very next thing after the selectors. I should put an S at the end, because we can have multiple ones that follow the same style rules. We will see this in class. Just going over some vocab terms to start. As long as the very next thing after the selector is the opening curly brace, and the very last thing is the closing curly brace, which I will be using this form right here. We have the keyword, and then the opening curly brace on the same line. And then the closing curly brace lines up with the keyword, and everything in between them gets indented. That's a very common one. A lot of your text editors will probably do that by default, because a few years back, somebody did just ask 10,000 programmers, what's the easiest way to read the curly braces, semicolons, set up your indenting and stuff. So it really was the results of thousands of programmers, and this was the majority. Opening curly brace on the same line as the keyword, closing curly brace lined up with the keyword, and everything in between indented. That's what the majority said. So that's what I'm going to use in class. And I think that's a fairly easy way to read it as well. However you want to set up your curly braces will be fine. And the other important part, well, the style rules, we just saw those. So inside of here, we have a bunch of style rules where we will say some CSS property, and there's a long list of them the book has a big appendix, and the back of the paper one. But on the ebook, if you go to the table of contents, there should be a link for a CSS appendix and an HTML appendix. Or that site we looked at the other day, the official reference material that on the w3schools.com. Or probably next week, we'll see the best reference, which is primarily a CSS thing. It does mention some HTML though. So we have a property, and it will always follow that pattern of fully spelled out, words are fully spelled out with a dash in between. Sometimes the order seems it seems out of order for the way we would say it in English, but it's not that bad, and you get used to the pattern very quickly. Everything strictly follows the same pattern. So the property name, a colon, and then the value we want to assign to that property, and then a semicolon for end of instruction, because this is very related to something called struct in C++, and it's converted to that when it gets inside. So we need the end of instruction character in these, and then we just fill up a whole bunch of properties. So all of our CSS selectors will look like this. Actually, I'm going to spell that out a little bit different to highlight that dash part. Property dash 1, then a colon, the value we want to assign to it, and then a colon. And then I'll do property dash second, just to change it up a little. A colon means assignment here, and assign it that value, and then our end of instruction character. We do need that in CSS. So all of our stuff's going to look like that, and that's how we apply style rules to make things look different. So let's see the embedded one now. We put those in between a tag in the head section. This is information about the page. It's the style rules this page needs to follow. So it's something about the overall page entirely. So we put a style tag up in the head section, way up here between the opening and closing head, before we get to the body, before any of the stuff shows except for what's in the little tab up at the top of the browser. And we start typing style. I can see it comes up there, previews this little thing called media. I think we'll talk about media in week 5, and you'll pretty much never set your media to be screen. It'll be screen and something, screen and, or probably never just screen by itself, like what that predictive text just put there. Because by default, it's going to the screen. So if we're typing something there, we need a little more, we need more details. What type of screen? Is it a big screen, a little screen? Is it landscape or portfolio format? Lots of different things that can happen with the screen, but we'll see that in week 5. So in between that opening and closing style tag, I'll space these out a little. And I haven't mentioned it yet, so I'll put it somewhere. If we want to comment in HTML, it's like a tag. So we need an angle bracket and then an exclamation mark, 2 dashes, and then something about whatever the comment is, and then 2 dashes and the other angle bracket. So that's what a comment looks like. For those who have seen other programming languages, when I say the word comment, you immediately think of the part of the code that does not get run. However, HTML comments, like if I was to come down here and comment out this much of the code, that will still run. It's a legacy thing for backward compatibility that we can't really get rid of. Before HTML5, not only did we not have standards, we had to write our HTML code different for every browser. So we needed a version of it to show on Internet Explorer, and a different version of the same page to show on Safari, and a different version of the same page to show on Netscape Navigator, going way back. And what people would do, what became very common, and then the people who made browsers just kind of went with it, is if something wouldn't work on a particular browser, like Safari was typically more powerful than Internet Explorer back in the day, so we could add extra features in for the Safari version of the page that we didn't want causing Internet Explorer to crash. So we would comment them out. And then they didn't work on Internet Explorer, but Safari would still read them. So browsers still read HTML code that's commented out. It's not ignored like in other programming languages. So that's something to remember. In short, the comments might be useful for little labels, like say we have embedded CSS here, but they're not really comments. They're not ignored. They change the colors in the text editors. That's about it. So we need some properties, and the way we select things, it'll involve that list that I erased from the board. We will get to that list in detail soon. Our primary selector is the tag itself, the name of the tag, and then there's a name attribute inside of each tag. But we can ask for the name of the tag. So instead of putting this style background red in the header, I can do that as an embedded one. I'll say, ask for the header tag. So the selector, our starting point for selectors is the name of the tag we want. So you okay, go to the header tags. Then in the curly braces, we'll put the properties. Set the background color property, again, spelled out with a dash. Everything in CSS can be spelled out fully with a dash between words. Set that to red. End of this instruction. Don't forget your end of instruction character. If it's the very last instruction, that'll be fine. Obviously, that's the end. But if it's anything other than the very last one before you hit a curly brace, that would cause problems. So when I reload this, you'll see kind of the same thing happen. Also have the footer that way. We can put them together, but for now, since the first day of this, I'm just going to do a single selector on each one instead of multiple selectors. So I'll do the second one for the footer to kind of match this picture I drew, which also had a red background on the footer, because there's not very many options in colors or markers, but it'll work to get the example across. Again, background color will be set to red. If I reload it, oh, there we go. Now the headers set with the really big text or red background. The header H3 was kind of big. Move again, sizes. We'll see sizes soon. I'll just finish that. Also in that footer, I put the copyright information. Seems like that's usually centered on a page, so we could do that. Just to have multiple properties here. So once again, the words are spelled out. Text align. Where are we going to put that? And there's some keywords already built in for us. One of those is center. There we go. So that now we have a red background and the copyright stuff is in the middle of the page. Have those different ones, and that's the first look at what we're going to be spending most of our time on this semester is CSS stuff. Okay, that kind of works. Gives the things all the way across the whole page. The article tags and the paragraphs were kind of a big one because there's multiple ones of those. So that would be the one that was a real problem to put in line. Oh yeah, and if you do it in line as an attribute, you have to do those in line. Can't put a line breaker. So that gets really messy typing those in. Or you can only put line breaks in certain spots. So, and even then it gets messy with multiple things inside the tag. Let's say the article tags next. Once again, I'll do the background color. I'm going to use sky blue instead of blue. Just because I know what happens if I tell a computer just the word blue or just use the word green. It gets a very dark blue, and there's lots of named ones. I believe our textbook has a list of the named colors. I will look before we finish up today and make sure that I'm remembering the right textbook. And then finally, to match the picture on the board, we have some P tags, and this is the foreground color. So foreground is a little bit different. Background color, we had to specify that it's the color for the background. If you think about what HTML is explicitly, the big T in HTML, that stands for text. HTML is all about text and graphics. So text is our primary thing. So the color of the text is just color. That one's specified. When you use CSS and other programming languages, that might not be specified, and it'll be foreground color, like foreground dash color. But for HTML, it's all about text. So some of the properties for that are abbreviated. What did I put there? Green. I'll do forest green, or maybe lime green. Let's see what lime green looks like. Lime green. It's just like the blue. Typing just green can be a little funky there. I'll do forest green. That's pretty light. There we go. So not much as we get started out, just some basic things, looking at the syntax. We're pretty much going to do maybe 80% CSS, and then we'll look at various tags, some of the specialty tags as we move through the semester. But for the most part, we're going to be looking at CSS and styling stuff and things like that, and making the web page look really nice. We saw how to put text on it in just a couple days, and then there are tags that do special things. And when we get to the end of the semester, I'll have some random odds and ends that'll be useful, or maybe just neat things to know, such as any method we have to give instructions to a computer. Technically, we can give the computer any instruction it can run by that method. But it's not always feasible. So when we get near the end of the semester, if there's a few minutes, I'll show you how to do math with HTML. But it is something you will definitely never do because it is not feasible at all. It is quite a chore. So it's just kind of something to see. And I guess maybe if you ever need to show somebody that it is possible to do math in HTML, we can show them that. But we probably very rarely use it. Also use a lot of functions in CSS. I don't think our book used very many. They had a couple of functions in there, but functions have really added up over the last 3 years. CSS functions and CSS variables, which I don't think our book even got to. But last fall, they finally added flex and grid, which have been part of the official standard for 6 years. It takes textbooks a minute to catch up. CSS variables and CSS functions have really been expanding over the past couple years. So we'll spend a little bit of time looking at those. And I don't think our book doesn't mention many at all. Has some basic ones that have been around for a while, but we'll see quite a few things. And we're mostly going to look at CSS. So that worked. What we did here with the embedded CSS, it changed that everything on the web page. But there's kind of a problem about expansion, like we just saw with tags. There's going to be a lot to turn that inline stuff into the whole page. Usually we don't have just a single page, right? We have a website made of lots of pages. And we probably want the CSS to be consistent across them. Really, that's an important thing. That's how we tell those web pages go together, is they have the same style rules. So when we navigate between them, they look the same. And when a page suddenly looks different, follows a completely different set of style rules, it's like, oh, well, we left the site we were just on. That must have been the wrong link. So hit back and get back to the site you were on and looking for something on. Looking at you were intending to be looking at. So we want our style rules to be the same across all pages. We can put an embedded one in each thing. That's what number 3 that I wrote on the board there is. Stop here. There it is. Because alternatively, and the one we will use by far the most is external. Have anything special in notes about it? Yeah, if y'all haven't noticed, these notes were written in 2019, I think, January 2019. So I'm not really going through them in the same order anymore, as I keep having to flip back and forth. I think it's about time to redo the yellow pages, now that I've taught this class a few times. But we have an external sheet, a separate file that we can refer to. I'm going to write, this is our go-to method for CSS. Do it in an external sheet first. I might as well mention here, I know we're not going to see it till odds and ends at the end, maybe slightly before, but we can refer to somebody else's style sheet as well. We can have more than one external style sheet. We're not restricted on them. So maybe we have, whatever website we're making has some connection to Purdue for some reason or another. The Purdue University website has all their official stuff, right? Their official colors, their official font. And we can go look up what those are and type them in our set of style rules. Or we can just refer to the Purdue University official style sheet and then use that in the places where our website might be referring to them. Or any other university. That was just the first one that popped in my mind. Actually, that's the one that was in the notes. So that's the one I wrote down 3 years ago. But we can use somebody else's external style sheet as well, not just our own. So it adds a lot of expansion that way. It's a requirement for your final project. And then the three types can be used as overriding. So the external style sheet, it's a outside file of CSS properties. Of CSS properties. I'm not going to write properties because property is one of our keywords. key vocabulary terms. It's an outside file of CSS. And it will apply to entire site. Apply to entire site. The embedded one, where we put in a tag, it's in that file. That document file is going to show other things. So obviously it only applies to that one web page, that one page. To one page. So we have our overriding rules, style rules for the entire site. But maybe on one of our pages, we want to change some of those rules. So then we would add in an embedded style sheet to override the rules from the external. And the computer looks at them in that order. It looks at the external sheet first, then it looks at the embedded style sheet, and then finally it looks at the inline style sheet. So we have our site, rules for the whole site, little modifications we want to change for a particular page, and then the modifications for a particular element. Applies to a single element. So it's a layer of overriding. The computer looks externally first, then at the embedded one up in the head section, and runs, and it does run all those rules. So it runs all the external rules, and then it runs all the embedded rules. So the ones that, so it's not like the traditional sense of overriding. It just does something different, and it does something different quicker than the human can detect it. So it looks like overriding, has the same net effect as overriding, but really it does those things. Then it does these instructions, and it does them so quick a human never sees the first part. And then it looks at the inline ones. So we'll use that as layer for just that single element we want to change. So it gives us layers of overriding. I'm going to call it that. That's essentially what it is. So instead of these styles, I'm going to copy all of this, or cut all of that. And then I'll take this style tag out of this one. So without those style rules, we're back to just that black text on the white thing. So we need to put those somewhere, and they'll go into a new file. I delete that from here. There we go. Get rid of that extra thing there and make a new file in this project. I'll go ahead and hit save right off the bat, and this will be I'll call it example.css. So one thing you're going to notice in your textbook and online reference material and lots of places where you look things up about CSS, they almost always name their external style sheet styles.css. And you don't want to do that. They're doing that to keep the reference material simple, but you will very, very quickly end up with thousands of files called styles.css. That are really, really hard to keep up on. So give them meaningful names. Give each thing a meaning, each style sheet a meaningful name for what it applies to help keep track of it. So like on your homework assignments, it's the same site that's just going to continually expand throughout the semester. Every week, every chapter, there's more stuff to add to it. So you can name your style sheets like chapter 6 style, chapter 7 style, and all of that, and just then CSS for the extension. Now I'll paste that stuff in there. So same style rules, they're just external. But this part's trivial. Obviously, our page does not know about that. I copied it over, created the external style sheet, but we need to form a connection between them. So again, it's up here in the head section. To connect to it, we'll use a tag called link. And there are a couple attributes that we have to have. There's 2 attributes we have to have. There's a third one I'm going to type every time, and I would like for you all to type it. It's not necessarily required, but it is not covered in any other classes in the curriculum, and will be important at some point. So this is a place where we can get practice on that. So the 2 we have to have. So we're linking to something. We're forming a connection to some other data on the internet. So first thing we have to have is the relevance of it, which is abbreviated. REL is the relevance of the thing we're linking to. In our case, that relevance is going to be a style sheet. And then we need to say where it's at. And we talked about this some the other day. There's 2 ways we can go get data. We can either source the data or hyperlink reference the data. And the difference between them is a source means we need all of that data in the same order every time. We need all of it every single time in the same order. It's a solid chunk of data that does not change, and we can't use just parts of it. Such as a picture. Our image tag uses a source because it would be meaningless to describe some of the data representing that landscape image in this case. We need all of it in a particular order. A style sheet, this is going to apply to a site. There's a header and a footer, but maybe all of our pages don't have an article on. Not every page on the site is going to have an article. Maybe not every page on the site has a header. Different things. We just stuck the header on the home page, and everything else has a little navigation bar up there. So we may not need all of the data. We might, but all counts as part versus part does not count as all. All can be included when we say part of it. So with CSS, we might not need all of it, and we really don't care what order we put it in. We put it together in some sort of order. One of the things we're going to talk about a couple times through the semester is different orders we can put it in. So we don't care about what order it is, as long as the computer grabs the ones we need. So instead of a source, we want to do a hyperlink reference here, which again is abbreviated. We're going to hyperlink reference that style sheet. And it's in the same folder. We will talk about different things on addressing soon. And the third one, which our textbook doesn't include, there's a thing called MIME type, M-I-M-E type, which is information that a server sends to the client, telling it what sort of data is being sent. That will to help with the reassembly that we talk about is necessary for TCP/IP. We break it into packets and send those packets independently across the network. We need some way to identify the type of data that's being sent when it gets across. So we use MIME type. And well, the HTML5 standard is CSS is our style sheet. So we technically don't have to put the MIME type on the style sheet. But I want to cover it now because it doesn't show up anywhere else in the SDEV curriculum. And you will likely encounter MIME types somewhere. So I want to make sure it's covered. Our attribute in the tags is just type. And MIME types always look like this. It's text data containing CSS information. So type / usefulness is essentially how I remember the line type. So you can see it's really easy to type, and it's not covered anywhere else in the curriculum. So practice putting in the MIME type now. It might be good for you in the long run, but that's part of the HTML5 standard. So we're not really allowed to send a style sheet that's if we send a style sheet that's something other than text data with CSS values stored in it, it wouldn't validate. And then this is a standalone tag. We don't need anything else. So I'm going to go ahead and put that closing slash. It's not required in HTML, but other markup languages do require that on standalone languages, and they keep trying to include it in the HTML standard. So now we're referencing that other style sheet. So it will always look at least like this, and probably a good idea to get some practice with MIME types because they don't really show up anywhere in the curriculum, the software development curriculum here at Ivy Tech. It's a subtle thing, it's easy, but we do have to explicitly tell the server to inform the client what sort of data it's sending as part of necessary in TCP. It's just obvious here, so we don't actually have to include it. But now we link to that style sheet. So we have the relevance of it. It's a style sheet. And the hyperlink reference is it's located right here. So the computer can go over there and look and see if it finds those things. And then apply all those style rules like we saw. And then we can use embedded style sheets or inline style rules or inline style attributes to override those if we want to do on a particular page. So this class is probably 80% CSS. I mean 19%, 19% of HTML, and then just a couple other things thrown in there. Oh, I should back that off because I also want to look at some other markup languages. XML is one of the standards for transmitting data. SSML is the language Poly and Siri use. And other voice encoders. So we will look at a couple other things. So it's mostly CSS we're going to look at. Does anybody have any questions about the style sheets? So that's what we're going to get the most practice with this semester. Lots and lots and lots of styling things. And putting together the HTML tags. And since HTML does have a standard for layout and styles, programmers did take that standard and apply style sheets, cascading style sheets into places that did not have standards, and that way we have at least consistency. The TK interface library is available in pretty much all our programming languages. It's already included in Python. It's one most people that program Python think of first, but it is styled with CSS. There's another way that was originally built into it to set up the style rules, but the TK interface package takes cascading style sheets. So then it's consistent with the way we style things elsewhere. JavaFX. Java's had trouble with GUI packages. They built one, and then they built a better, and it was a complete mess. So they built a better one. They built an okay one. It was around for a while, and they spent decades building a great one. And then when they tried to implement the great one, they couldn't get rid of the okay one. There's too many things that have been built on. So that great one they took and turned it into its own language itself, separate from Java, so that they don't have that problem in the future. They can't get rid of something that is kind of glitchy and people shouldn't be using anyway. But JavaFX is uses style sheets by default. They went ahead and it's a fairly new one, so it was after the HTML5 standards. That's the default styling on them, but they do have some programmatic ways to style it. And lots of different programming languages are GUI packages, except CSS. So learning that in this class isn't just for web pages. Those heading into software development, you'll see it in a number of places. And now the wrap up for the class, like, okay, got those web pages going. We'll make sure they work. So jump back over to the free hosting site, because it seems to work when I go here from the MacBook. I'll figure out what's going on with the PC there, but might be coming time to replace my PC anyway. It's over 3 years old, 3.5 years old. Class 2 example, class 126. So should be able to upload that folder. Upload no folder. Yep, upload it. Does that. I still didn't delete this file. Delete that. Maybe cut forward. Oh. We're going to just give it 777 access. Now I can delete it. Nope, apparently not. Okay, that's weird. I have no idea why that's doing that, but nothing refers to it, so it's not going to hurt anything being there. But I'll try to figure that out. So if we go over here. It looks like it did before the break, right? And that has to do with caching. Remember, since the browser is expecting things to be transmitted across the internet, it's going to assume, or it's going to remember what it saw last time and try not to change it. So if we think about what happened last time, since before the break, all we've done is CSS stuff, right? All we've done is CSS, and I deleted the CSS out of here, so all of the CSS is external. So what the browser looks at, contacts the server sends it, and it quickly previews it. It's like, okay, well, this is the exact same HTML code that I saw last time I loaded the page. So contacts the server, it's like, never mind, I don't need that page, I already have it, because it hasn't changed. But we know the CSS has changed. So that's going to be important this semester. The caching, we'll look at the HTML, not the CSS. So if your HTML is still the same, you're probably going to see the cached version, not the updated version. A quick way to get into it is to get F12 in pretty much all your browsers. It opens the inspector. And once the inspector is open, we saw all of this. Over in sources, we'll see the CSS page isn't even there anymore. But once the inspector is open, if you do a long click on the reload, you get options on how to reload it. So a hard reload is probably enough. So there we go. A hard reload was enough to just ignore the cache and actually look at other stuff. You can see we can see the CSS file now. Oh, and this is an editor, so we can change it right here. That's great for practice. It does not change the saved file. So you can look for colors and sizes and things there on the inspector under sources. But once you find the one that looks good, make sure you change it in the file that actually saves. Because when you reload the page, that's no longer there. It reloads the saved one. And over in our inspector, something down here, like the header. Notice we see all those style rules with checkboxes, so we can turn them on and off and have lots of control. We'll see more and more about the inspector in general. The first one I want to point out is if you go to sources, you can edit your CSS. It does not save, but you can see the changes in live time. Makes it really, really nice for finding colors, honing in on the exact right size and spacing. So, but that's what we're going to spend most of our semester on. Some HTML, mostly CSS, a couple other things worked in here. Just because it seems like it's a good place for them. Things like the MIME type that don't really show up anywhere else in the SDEV curriculum that you're probably going to need to know about that at some point before it's suddenly something you have to rush in and are expected to know about. I guess I shouldn't say it doesn't show up anywhere else. It's going to show up in mobile app development, but then it's just part of your assignment. And they don't tell you anything about MIME type or how to do it. They just say apply. Put the MIME type in there, and they seem to expect you to know it. So I like to make it a point to express what a MIME type is, the type of data / the usefulness of the data. And the server, that's the information the server sends with the TCP protocol, so things can be reassembled. But this is an active subject. You are going to want to start getting practice with this. So start off with some simple selectors, select things by tags. And we're not going to know the board anymore. I tried to point at the board and the thing I was going to point at is not there anymore. We will work in names or classes and IDs and names and other ways to select them. Lots and lots of ways. We'll see some of the basic ones. We'll look at some impressive things people have done with CSS. Some people that maybe had way too much time on their hands, but done some really, really impressive pictures with CSS alone. We'll see quite a bit of it, but it takes practice. It's an active subject. So we have about an hour and 15 minutes left in our scheduled time. As always, text messages and Ivy Learn messages make noise on my phone, and I will, for the next hour and 15 minutes, I will be sitting around ready to jump back on a Zoom call if you have any questions. Otherwise, this is time to do stuff. It's an active subject we learn by doing. So now is a great time to go do stuff. Does anybody have any questions? Oh, thank you, Mark. Yes. Module 2 discussion board. I will change that very shortly. I forgot about that. The topic is kind of out of date. That would have been very relevant in 2010, 2011, but 2013 it was kind of fading away from the internet. So I will change the topic for version 2. Thank you, Mark. I forgot to do that. If y'all haven't looked yet, there's a big, great big text in bold on this module 2 discussion board. It says, if this isn't changed by module 2, let me remind me. So thank you. Any other questions? Okay, that'll be it for today. If you have any questions, let me know. The text messages and Ivy Learn messages make noise on my phone. I could be back on a Zoom call immediately for the next hour and a half, but you can ask me questions anytime. Y'all have a great weekend. I will see you on Monday. I had to think about when our next class was. See you on Monday.